My family ignored Grandma for 5 years until she won $2.3 million. 19 relatives showed up the day her will was read. That's the number that flashed on the screen, the lawyer's voice a monotone drone in the sterile office. But it was the silence that followed that really hit you. A hush fell over the room, the kind that's louder than any noise, filled with the suddenly shared breath of people who hadn't spoken to Grandma Eleanor in years. Not really. Not the kind of talking that involves showing up, or asking about her day, or bothering to remember her birthday. For 5 years, Grandma Eleanor, bless her stubborn heart, had been largely invisible to the vast majority of her sprawling, grasping family. Except for me. I was the one who'd take her to doctor's appointments, who'd bring her groceries when her arthritis made the trip to the market unbearable, who'd sit with her through endless reruns of old movies and listen to her stories, the same ones she'd told a million times, but which still held a certain magic, a flicker of the woman she used to be, before the slow fade of age and, let's be honest, the gradual erosion of her importance in the family pecking order. The family. Oh, the family. It was a classic American tapestry, woven with threads of ambition, thinly veiled resentment, and a whole lot of unspoken expectations. My dad, her son, was the golden child, the one who'd made something of himself in real estate, the one who'd always had Grandma's ear, or so everyone thought. But even he, my own father, had a way of prioritizing the important things, the meetings, the deals, the constant hustle that defined his life. Grandma Eleanor, once the matriarch whose word carried weight, had become inconvenient. Her house, a sprawling colonial out in the suburbs of Connecticut, was too far for regular visits, her needs too demanding for a quick phone call. The kids, my cousins, had their own lives, their own careers, their own kids to shuttle to soccer practice and piano lessons. The obligatory holiday dinners had dwindled to a strained Christmas gathering, a polite Thanksgiving where everyone made a point of admiring Dad's new car or complaining about the stock market. Grandma Eleanor sat at the head of the table, a queen on a shrinking throne, her bright eyes scanning the room, her smile a little too tight, a little too knowing. She never complained, not once. That was her superpower. She just watched, absorbed, and I think, somewhere deep down, she kept score. The day her will was read, it felt like a scene ripped from a cheesy daytime drama, except the stakes were terrifyingly real. The lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, a man whose suit probably cost more than my car, cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. The room was packed. It wasn't just the immediate family, Dad, his wife Carol, my younger brother Mark, his wife Sarah, and their 2 kids who'd never once asked Grandma if she needed anything. It was also the aunts and uncles I barely remembered, cousins who'd moved across the country and resurfaced only for major life events, even some distant third cousins twice removed who'd apparently heard the rumors. 19 faces, 19 eager, expectant faces, all focused on Mr. Abernathy, on the crisp white envelopes, on the potential spoils of Grandma Eleanor's life. I sat between my dad and Carol, Mark and Sarah on the other side. Dad was fidgety, a slight frown creasing his brow. Carol was all saccharine smiles, her eyes darting around the room, probably cataloging who was wearing what. Mark looked bored, scrolling through his phone. Sarah, on the other hand, looked genuinely sad, her hand resting on Mark's arm, a silent, futile attempt at connection. Mr. Abernathy began, his voice cutting through the thick, expectant silence. He read out the bequests to various charities, the small sums left to a few longtime friends. Each name called was met with a subtle shift in the room, a murmur of approval or disappointment. Then came the individual beneficiaries, the house, the estate, the investments. And then, the sum, $2.3 million. The number hung in the air, a tangible thing, a shimmering promise. And the silence. It wasn't just silence anymore. It was a collective intake of breath, a sudden unified desire to rewind the last 5 years, to reevaluate every missed call, every postponed visit, every superficial interaction. My dad coughed. Eleanor always was prudent, he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too casual. Carol nudged him. Mr. Abernathy continued, his gaze sweeping over the assembled relatives. And finally, the residual estate, which after all other bequests and taxes is estimated to be approximately $2.3 million, is to be divided equally among the following individuals. He paused, his finger tracing a line on the page. Her son, Robert Miller. Dad gave a little nod, a tight smile. Her granddaughter, Emily Carter. My heart did a strange little flutter. Emily Carter. That's me. I'd always been Emily. Even when the family had forgotten, I'd been Emily. Her grandson, Mark Miller. Mark looked up from his phone, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Her niece, Susan Peterson. Susan, who lived in Arizona and hadn't spoken to Grandma in a decade, let out a little gasp. Her nephew, David Chen. David Chen? Who the hell was David Chen? My dad's jaw tightened. Her nephew, Michael O'Malley. Another stranger. And then the list went on. Aunt Carol, Uncle George, Cousin Brenda, Cousin Kevin, Cousin Jennifer, Cousin Michael, Cousin... The names kept coming, and with each name, a wave of bewilderment, then dawning comprehension, then outright shock rippled through the room. 19 names, 19 people, and a $2.3 million fortune. Divided by 19, that's a lot. A life-changing amount for most. And for me, sitting there, it was an answer. An answer to the quiet ache I'd felt for years. The feeling of being on the outside looking in. The understanding that Grandma Eleanor's love, while real for me, had been a commodity largely ignored by the rest. Dad's face had gone from pale to a mottled red. He stared at Mr. Abernathy, then at the list, then back at Dad. There has to be a mistake, he said, his voice low, dangerous. Susan Peterson? David Chen? Michael O'Malley? Eleanor barely knew those people. Mr. Abernathy remained impassive. Mrs. Miller was very clear in her instructions, Mr. Miller. This is the distribution as per her final will, signed and witnessed. Carol leaned in, her voice a stage whisper that carried across the room. Robert, darling, are you sure? Did she make new friends? Or maybe these are distant relatives from your father's side, dear, or mine. She shot a pointed look at Dad. My brother Mark, usually so detached, was staring at his phone again, but this time he wasn't scrolling. He was holding it out, his thumbs moving rapidly. He'd clearly already done the math. His eyes widened. And then the real reckoning began. The murmuring turned into a low roar. Faces that had been placid moments before contorted with disbelief, then suspicion. Eyes met across the room, not in greeting, but in accusation. Susan Peterson, a woman with brightly dyed purple hair and a nose ring who I'd never seen before in my life, stood up, her voice shrill. She left me money? But I only met her once, at a wedding. Another woman, impeccably dressed, her hair styled in a severe bun, spoke up. My mother, Martha Jenkins, was Eleanor's cousin. We lost touch after Martha passed, but Eleanor always sent a Christmas card, didn't she? Her voice dripped with a manufactured nostalgia. The lawyer held up his hands. If there are any disputes, they will need to address through the appropriate legal channels. For now, this is the reading of the will. But the floodgates had opened. The polite facade of family unity had shattered. Cousins who'd sat beside each other in polite silence were now eyeing each other with a new calculation. The $2.3 million had not only bought Grandma Eleanor silence for 5 years, it had bought it a spectacular, explosive reunion. The air crackled with tension, with greed, with a primal, ugly understanding that the perceived slights, the forgotten birthdays, the ignored pleas for connection had all been building to this moment. And I, Emily Carter, the granddaughter who had bothered, who had visited, who had listened, was just one of 19 suddenly very important people. The humiliation wasn't directed at me, not yet. But I could feel it radiating from my father, from Carol, from the sheer, unadulterated shock on their faces. They, the ones who were supposed to be the closest, the most important, were now just a fraction. And the 19 strangers, the forgotten acquaintances, the distant relatives, were all suddenly equal. Or at least equally wealthy in Grandma Eleanor's final calculated act. I looked at my father, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. And I knew this was far from over. This was just the beginning of the real inheritance, the inheritance of consequence. The office, moments ago a place of solemn ritual, now buzzed with a frantic energy. People were pulling out phones, their fingers flying across screens, undoubtedly already calling lawyers, financial advisors, anyone who could help them navigate this sudden windfall. Susan Peterson, the one with the purple hair, was already cornering Mr. Abernathy, her voice a high-pitched whine. "So, when do we get the money? Is it direct deposit or a check?" Mr. Abernathy, bless his professional detachment, managed a practiced smile. "The process will take some time, Miss Peterson. There are legal procedures that must be followed. Probating the will, settling any outstanding estate taxes." Taxes? David Chen, a man with a slicked-back haircut and a gold chain that seemed to be fighting its way out of his shirt collar, scoffed. "She left $2.3 million. She must have had a damn good accountant. I assumed all that was handled." My dad, still sitting rigid, finally spoke, his voice low and tight. "Eleanor was always meticulous, but this division is absurd. There must be some codicil, some explanation." Mr. Abernathy shook his head. "This is the final, legally binding will, Mr. Miller, dated 6 months prior to Mrs. Miller's passing. It was drafted and reviewed by legal counsel. She was of sound mind." The words sound mind hung in the air, a subtle accusation. Was she? Or was she finally, decisively, exercising a power she'd long held back? I shifted in my seat, feeling the weight of all those eyes, all those suddenly awakened connections. My dad caught my gaze, his expression unreadable for a split second, before hardening into something I recognized as pure, cold resentment. He believed, I knew, that Grandma Eleanor had deliberately orchestrated this to spite him, to diminish his importance, to prove that his perceived neglect had consequences far beyond a few missed phone calls. Carol, ever the pragmatist, leaned over and whispered, "Robert, we need to be smart about this. We need to understand who these people are. Maybe we can negotiate." Negotiate. The word tasted like ash. Grandma Eleanor had never been one for negotiation when it came to what she wanted. She'd always had a quiet strength, a determination that simmered beneath the surface. I remembered, years ago, when my dad had wanted her to sell her house and move into a smaller condo, she'd politely but firmly refused. "This is my home, Robert," she'd said, her voice soft but unwavering, "and I'll stay here until I can no longer manage." She'd managed. And now, in her own way, she'd managed this too. She'd controlled the narrative, the distribution, the final act of her life, ensuring that those who had treated her like a forgotten relic were now forced to confront their own choices, their own oversights, in the most public and potentially humiliating way possible. The room was a chaotic symphony of hushed arguments and strategic whispers. I saw my uncle, my dad's brother, a man I'd always thought of as kind and gentle, cornering Mr. Abernathy, his face flushed. He was gesturing wildly, his voice rising. "This is insane. I haven't seen Eleanor in 20 years. Why would she leave me money?" Mr. Abernathy, looking increasingly harried, just kept repeating that it was her will. The sheer unpredictability of it all, the way it upended all expectations, was clearly unsettling everyone. For years, the family had operated under a certain unspoken hierarchy. Dad, as the successful son, was at the top. My brother Mark, the younger son, was next. Then came the cousins, the aunts, the uncles, their importance loosely correlated with their proximity to Dad or their perceived financial success. Grandma Eleanor, in her declining years, had been at the bottom, a quiet, fading presence. Now, the $2.3 million had flipped the script entirely. It had democratized wealth, albeit in a deeply, unsettlingly random fashion. I saw my father stand up abruptly. Carol grabbed his arm. "Robert, where are you going?" "I'm going for a walk," he snapped, his eyes still fixed on the bewildered faces around the room. "I need some air." He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Mark. He just walked out, the heavy office door closing behind him with a definitive thud. Mark finally put his phone down, a strange, almost triumphant glint in his eyes. "Well, that's unexpected," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. He nudged Sarah. "Looks like Aunt Eleanor had a few surprises up her sleeve, huh?" Sarah, though, just looked uncomfortable. She squeezed Mark's arm, her gaze drifting towards the door my father had exited. "Your dad seems pretty upset, Mark." "He'll get over it," Mark said, his tone dismissive. $23 million divided by 19? That's still a nice chunk. More than he probably expected from her, frankly. He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought. "And hey, at least we're on the list. Some people are probably kicking themselves right now." He meant people like me, I realized. The ones who had shown up, the ones who had visited, the ones who had cared. Was this Grandma Eleanor's way of rewarding loyalty? or punishing neglect. The line was so blurry, so infuriatingly ambiguous. I felt a strange surge of something akin to pride, mixed with a gnawing unease. I was on the list. I was getting a significant sum of money. But the cost of getting here, the years of being overlooked, the sudden, brutal clarity of the family's true priorities was a bitter pill to swallow. Mr. Abernathy was trying to regain control, his voice a little strained.
If everyone could please remain calm, we will be sending out formal documentation regarding the probate process within the next week. In the meantime, I suggest you refrain from any discussions that could be construed as undue influence. Undue influence. The word seemed to hang in the air, a thinly veiled warning. But the damage was already done. The whispers had already started. The calculations were already underway. As I stood up to leave, I saw the purple-haired Susan Peterson already taking selfies with a bewildered-looking man who'd just been identified as her second cousin twice removed. The entire scene was a bizarre testament to human nature, a stark reminder of how quickly familial bonds could fray and reform when large sums of money were involved. Walking out of the office and into the bright, indifferent sunshine of a suburban afternoon, I felt a profound sense of disorientation. The world outside had not changed, but my place within it, and more importantly, my family's perception of my place, had been irrevocably altered. My father's anger, Carol's calculation, Mark's smugness, it was all laid bare now, stripped of any pretense. Grandma Eleanor, in her final act, had not just left money, she'd left a truth. And that truth was uglier, more complicated, and far more dramatic than any of us had anticipated. I had won. We had all, in a strange way, won. But standing there, the cool breeze on my face, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle had just begun. This wasn't an ending. It was a terrifying, exhilarating, and deeply unsettling prologue. The silence that had preceded the announcement of the $2.3 million was nothing compared to the deafening silence that would follow. The silence of years of unspoken resentments finally finding their voice, their price. And I knew with a chilling certainty that Grandma Eleanor, wherever she was, would be watching, and perhaps, just perhaps, she'd be smiling. The drive home from Mr. Abernathy's office was a study in controlled chaos. My father, when he finally returned to the car after his walk, was a volcano on the verge of eruption, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. Carol, beside him, was a coiled spring of anxiety and calculation, her eyes darting between her husband and the road, occasionally muttering about managing expectations and strategic alliances. Mark and Sarah sat in the back, Mark still smug, Sarah visibly uncomfortable, her gaze fixed on the passing trees, her silence a stark contrast to the buzzing tension in the front. I was in the passenger seat, a silent observer to the unraveling of our carefully constructed family facade, the $2.3 million of phantom weight in my gut. "This is an outrage," my father finally declared, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the car. 19 people. 19! Eleanor was a sentimental old woman, yes, but she wasn't a fool. She wouldn't have just randomly divvied up her life savings like that. There has to be something else. "Maybe she reconnected with some old friends, Robert," Carol offered, her tone saccharine sweet, but her eyes sharp. "Or distant relatives from your mother's side of the family before they moved away. It happens." "Distant relatives who suddenly appear on a will 6 months before she dies?" Dad scoffed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. "And people I've never even heard of? David Chen? Michael O'Malley? Susan Peterson?" "She barely knew them, Carol. I know for a fact she hadn't seen Susan since that awful wedding in Vermont 10 years ago, and even then, it was at a distance." Mark piped up from the back, his voice laced with amusement. "Maybe she found some online friends, Dad. The internet is a strange place." "Don't be ridiculous, Mark," Dad retorted, but the edge in his voice betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. He was grasping at straws, just like the rest of them. As we pulled into the driveway of our sprawling family home, a place that suddenly felt far too large and too ostentatious for the ugly truth that had just been revealed, I felt a shift within me. The initial shock was giving way to something colder, something more deliberate. Grandma Eleanor, the woman who had patiently listened to my childhood worries, who had always had a kind word and a warm hug, had left behind not just money, but a profound and frankly brilliant statement. She hadn't been a fool. She'd been a strategist. She'd known exactly what she was doing. Later that evening, after the strange semblance of a family dinner, a meal punctuated by forced silences and furtive glances, I found myself in the library, ostensibly looking for a book, but really just needing to be alone. The room was hushed, lined with the leather-bound volumes that my father had collected over the years, a testament to his success, his status. It was a room that reeked of privilege and inherited wealth, the very things Grandma Eleanor had seemingly redistributed with such deliberate randomness. I ran my fingers along the spines, the familiar weight of the books a small comfort. Then my gaze fell on a small, unassuming wooden box tucked away on a lower shelf, almost hidden behind a collection of antique maps. I'd never noticed it before. Curiosity tugged at me. I pulled it out. It was intricately carved, the wood dark and smooth, with a small, tarnished silver clasp. It looked like a jewelry box, but it felt heavier than it should have. With a slight tremor in my hands, I opened it. Inside, nestled on faded velvet lining, were not jewels, but a collection of folded documents, a small, old-fashioned key, and a worn leather-bound journal. The journal! My heart skipped a beat. It was Grandma Eleanor's. I opened it, the pages brittle with age. The handwriting was delicate, looping, unmistakably hers.
The first few entries were typical diary fare: observations about the weather, notes on her garden, mentions of family gatherings. But as I flipped further, the tone began to change. The entries became more frequent, more detailed, and increasingly focused on the family's behavior towards her. October 14th, I read, the ink slightly faded. Robert called today, only to remind me about the property taxes on the estate. Didn't ask how I was, didn't mention the autumn leaves, just the money, always the money. I tried to remember what it felt like when he was a boy, full of wonder. Where did that boy go? Another entry, dated a few months later. Carol visited, brought a fruit basket, stayed for 20 minutes, complained about the traffic, smiled a lot. Her eyes, though, they were always scanning the room, as if assessing the value of the furniture. She asked if I'd considered downsizing, said it would be easier for me. Easier for whom, I wonder? The entries painted a stark, unflattering portrait of my family's interactions with Grandma Eleanor over the past few years. It wasn't just neglect, it was a calculated indifference, a passive acceptance of her fading relevance as long as she remained an unassuming figure in the background. They had treated her like a forgotten piece of furniture, valuable only for its potential resale value. But then, the journal took a surprising turn. There were entries detailing her growing interest in financial planning, in securing her legacy. She mentioned attending seminars, meeting with financial advisors, and discreetly researching estate planning. She was not a passive victim. She was actively taking control. March 2nd, one entry read, "Met with Mr. Abernathy today. A good man, meticulous. We discussed my affairs. He advised against any drastic changes, given the current dynamics, but I have made my wishes clear. The future must be equitable, a reflection of true value, not perceived entitlement. The money should be a catalyst, not a reward for presence. It should stir the pot, shake the foundations of their complacency." My breath hitched. Catalyst, shake the foundations. This was it. This was the explanation for the 19 names. Grandma Eleanor hadn't just won the lottery. She'd been planning this. She'd been meticulously crafting her final act, a grand, sweeping gesture designed to expose the hollowness at the heart of her family. Further in the journal, I found more specific details. She'd made a list of people she believed had shown genuine kindness or possessed a certain quiet integrity, people who might have been overlooked, or people who had touched her life in small, meaningful ways. She'd compiled it over years, a secret project fueled by a deep, quiet wisdom and a sharp understanding of human nature. The names weren't random. Susan Peterson, who had sent her a handmade scarf years ago after a chance encounter at a craft fair. David Chen, who had been her gardener's son and had once helped her carry heavy bags from the supermarket, a small act of kindness she'd never forgotten. Michael O'Malley, a kind elderly man who lived down the street and always waved to her from his porch. The distant relatives, she'd simply included them because they were family, and she believed in the principle of inclusion, even if they had drifted away. The key in the box. I looked at it, then back at the journal. A memory surfaced. Grandma Eleanor wearing a small, antique locket that she always kept closed. She'd once told me it held a secret. I reread the journal, searching for any mention of the key, and then I found it. April 10th. I have entrusted the final piece to my trusted advisors at Abernathy's. The contents within the carved box are a testament to a different kind of wealth, the wealth of memory, of kindness, of connection. The key opens a small safety deposit box at Sterling National Bank. It contains documents that will clarify my intentions should any disputes arise regarding the distribution. Let them understand that true value is not always measured in proximity or inherited status. Sterling National Bank. I knew it. It was a local bank, small and discreet, nestled in a less than glamorous part of town, a place my father would never deign to frequent. My father, with his ostentatious displays of wealth, his country club memberships, his preference for the flashy and the grand, would never have considered a place like Sterling National. The implications hit me with the force of a physical blow. Grandma Eleanor had anticipated the fallout. She had foreseen the greed, the accusations of senility, the attempts to rewrite her will. She had prepared for it. She had a secret stash of documents, accessible only by that small tarnished key, that would not only explain her choices, but likely solidify her intentions in an ironclad legal fashion, leaving no room for doubt or manipulation. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was about validation. For Grandma Eleanor. And, in a way, for me. The years I had spent visiting her, listening to her stories, bringing her groceries, they hadn't been a waste of time. They had been an investment, and now that investment was about to pay dividends, not just in cash, but in vindication. I carefully placed the journal back in the box and closed the lid. The weight of it felt different now, heavier with knowledge, with a newfound sense of purpose. My father's fury, Carol's calculating glances, Mark's smugness, it all seemed so pathetic. They were blinded by their own entitlement, unable to see the profound intelligence and quiet strength that Grandma Eleanor had possessed until the very end. The next morning, before the usual cacophony of the household began, I slipped out of the house. I drove to Sterling National Bank, the small wooden box carefully placed on the passenger seat.
The bank was quiet, unassuming, exactly as I remembered. I approached the teller, my heart pounding. "I need to access a safety deposit box," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I have the key." The teller, a young woman with kind eyes, smiled. "Certainly. Do you have the box number?" I opened the wooden box and handed her the small key. She examined it, then looked at me, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Ah, yes, Mrs. Eleanor Miller's box. We were expecting you, Miss Carter." Expecting me? Of course they were. Grandma Eleanor had planned this meticulously. She'd likely prearranged this with the bank, ensuring a smooth and discreet handover of information. She led me to a small private room. Inside, a discreet assistant brought out a sturdy metal box. The key slid smoothly into the lock. The lid creaked open, revealing a stack of documents, meticulously organized and labeled. There were copies of the will, of course, but also detailed financial statements, letters of intent, and even a sworn affidavit from Grandma Eleanor, signed and notarized, clearly stating her rationale for the distribution of her estate. It was all there, a comprehensive blueprint of her final wishes, designed to be irrefutable. I spent the next hour poring over the documents, my mind racing. Her reasoning was so clear, so logical, so Eleanor. She had explicitly stated that she wanted her wealth to benefit those who might appreciate it, those who might use it to build something new, or those who had shown genuine kindness, rather than those who had simply expected it as an inheritance, a birthright. She'd noted my consistent presence, my quiet support, as a primary reason for my significant share. She'd written about how my father and Mark, while her loved ones, had created lives of their own, lives of financial security, and that they didn't need this money in the same way others on the list might. She'd even addressed the potential for family discord, stating her hope that this redistribution would encourage a deeper understanding of true familial value, beyond mere financial obligation. This wasn't just a redistribution of wealth, it was a redistribution of respect, and it was all documented, all legally binding. My father and his ilk wouldn't be able to twist this, to argue their way into more. Grandma Eleanor had covered every angle. As I left the bank, the wooden box felt lighter, but my resolve had solidified into something hard and unyielding. I knew what I had to do. The passive recipient of an unexpected windfall was no longer enough. I was now the custodian of Grandma Eleanor's final, most profound truth. The next few days were a carefully orchestrated dance of avoidance and subtle observation. I saw the tension radiating from my father and Carol, the way they spoke in hushed tones, the hurried phone calls.
Mark and Sarah were less overtly stressed, Mark still exuding an air of detached amusement, but Sarah's discomfort seemed to deepen with each passing hour. They were all trying to figure out their next move, likely attempting to rally the other beneficiaries, to form a united front against what they perceived as a rogue will. but they were playing checkers, while Grandma Eleanor had planned chess, and I held the king. The first real confrontation came, predictably, at Sunday dinner. The air was thick with unspoken accusations. My father sat at the head of the table, his face set in a hard mask, his eyes never quite meeting mine. Carol was fluttering around him, her smile strained, her attempts at conversation falling flat. Mark was picking at his food, a bored expression on his face, while Sarah picked at her own, her shoulders hunched. "So, Emily," my father began, his voice tight, cutting through the silence like a shard of glass, "have you had any thoughts about what you'll do with your share?" The question was loaded. It wasn't innocent curiosity. It was an attempt to gauge my loyalty, to see if I could be swayed, if I was one of the reasonable ones who would fall in line. I met his gaze directly, a small, genuine smile finally gracing my lips. "Yes, Dad, I have." Carol leaned forward, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Oh, and what might that be, dear?" "Grandma Eleanor left me her journal and some other documents," I said, my voice calm and even, deliberately letting the words hang in the air. She was very clear about her intentions. She wanted to ensure her wealth went to people who could genuinely appreciate it, people who might use it to create something new or to make a difference. A hush fell over the table. My father's jaw tightened. Carol's smile vanished. Mark finally looked up from his plate, his eyes wide with surprise. "What documents?" my father demanded, his voice laced with suspicion. "Abernathy said the will was final." "The will is final, Dad," I agreed, my voice still calm. But Grandma Eleanor also anticipated that some people might question her decisions, so she made sure to leave a clear explanation, a very detailed explanation. I paused, letting the implication sink in. "And a sworn affidavit with supporting financial records at Sterling National Bank, all legally notarized and binding." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't the tense silence of anticipation from the lawyer's office. It was the stunned silence of realization. The jig was up. They couldn't argue. They couldn't manipulate. Grandma Eleanor had anticipated their every move. My father's face contorted with a mixture of rage and disbelief. She did this deliberately? She set us up? "She wanted to ensure her legacy was honored, Dad," I said softly, the first hint of true steel entering my voice. "Not just her money, her legacy."
And she wanted to remind everyone that sometimes the people who show up, the people who care, are worth more than the people who just expect. Carol let out a shaky breath. This is preposterous. She was a confused old woman." "Was she?" I challenged, my gaze unwavering. "Because from what I've read, she was sharper than any of us gave her credit for. She understood the dynamics of this family better than anyone. She saw the entitlement, the neglect, and she decided to do something about it." Mark, for the first time that evening, spoke with a genuine flicker of interest, not amusement. "So what does the affidavit say, Emily? About us?" "It says you've both built successful lives, Mark," I said, turning to him. "Lives that don't depend on this money. And it says that Grandma Eleanor believed the other beneficiaries, many of whom have struggled more, or who showed her specific acts of kindness, deserved a chance to build something too. A chance that might otherwise have been denied them." My father slammed his fist on the table, the silverware rattling. "This is an insult, to me, to our family name." "It's a consequence, Dad," I said, my voice firm. "A consequence of choices made over years. Grandma Eleanor wasn't punishing anyone. She was simply rebalancing the scales. She was ensuring that true value, true kindness, was recognized. And that those who took her for granted, those who only showed up when there was something to gain, would have to face the reality of their own actions." The rage was building in my father's eyes, a dangerous storm. But beneath it, I saw something else, a dawning horror. The certainty of his perceived inheritance, the bedrock of his family's perceived superiority, had just been shattered. He was no longer the golden sun at the center of the universe. He was just one of 19. And in his mother's final, brilliant act, he was demonstrably the least deserving. Carol was pale, her hands trembling as she clutched her napkin. Mark, for once, looked genuinely contemplative, a strange mixture of shock and dawning respect in his eyes. Sarah, beside him, offered a small, almost imperceptible nod of understanding. The confrontation wasn't over, not by a long shot. The anger would simmer, the resentment would fester. But the power had shifted. Grandma Eleanor, in her quiet,
determined way, had orchestrated a coup from beyond the grave. She had exposed the rotten core, and now the real reckoning was about to begin. I looked at my father, at the dawning realization of his diminished standing, and a cold, hard certainty settled within me. This wasn't about the money anymore. This was about justice. And Grandma Eleanor had ensured that in the end, justice would be served, no matter how long it took or how ugly it became. The silence that followed was no longer one of shock. It was the prelude to a storm, and I, armed with my grandmother's truth, was ready to face it.
The aftermath of that Sunday dinner was a quiet, seething storm. My father retreated into his study, the door a defiant barrier between him and the rest of us, punctuated by the occasional muffled roar of frustration. Carol, usually a whirlwind of frantic activity, moved through the house like a ghost, her face a mask of wounded dignity and barely suppressed fury. Mark, ever the pragmatist, called his lawyer almost immediately, his initial amusement replaced by a grim determination to understand the new landscape. Sarah, bless her heart, tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but her eyes held a perpetual sadness, as if she already mourned the death of the family as she knew it. I, on the other hand, felt a strange, almost serene sense of calm. It wasn't the giddy exhilaration of winning a lottery, but the profound peace that comes after a long, arduous battle, a battle fought in the quiet spaces of the heart and mind. Grandma Eleanor's journal, her meticulous planning, had given me more than money. It had given me clarity. It had validated the years I'd spent trying to be a good person, a good granddaughter, in a family that often prioritized appearances over substance. The calls started a few days later, a steady, insistent stream of voices I barely recognized. Distant cousins, the ones Grandma Eleanor had included, sounding bewildered, then cautious, then, in some cases, cautiously optimistic. A woman named Brenda, who Grandma had met at a quilting bee years ago, and who apparently had a son struggling with medical bills, called me directly, her voice thick with emotion. She explained how Grandma Eleanor had always been a steady presence, a listening ear during her own difficult times. It wasn't about entitlement for Brenda, it was about a lifeline. Then came the inevitable calls from my father's side, and from Carol's side, desperate, probing, trying to gauge the temperature, to understand the scale of the injustice. They'd heard about Abernathy, about the scattered beneficiaries, and they were circling like vultures, their entitlement a palpable, offensive thing. My father, when he did emerge, would meet me with a look that could curdle milk, his silence more damning than any accusation. He'd stopped acknowledging me as his daughter. I was simply the anomaly, the betrayer. Carol tried a different tactic. She cornered me in the kitchen one afternoon, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Emily, honey," she began, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Your father is devastated. This whole situation has completely undone him. He's always provided for us, worked so hard for this family. To be treated like this by his own mother, it's just cruel." I simply watched her, a faint smile playing on my lips. Grandma Eleanor wasn't being cruel, Carol. She was being honest. Honest? She scoffed, her facade cracking. By giving away perfectly good family money to strangers? To people she barely knew? It's madness, Emily. And you're enabling it. I'm honoring her wishes, I corrected, my voice firm. And perhaps, Carol, it's time we all acknowledge that Grandma Eleanor knew more about the true value of people than some of us gave her credit for. Her eyes flashed with anger. You think you're so clever, don't you? Thinking you've outsmarted us all. But this isn't over. Your father won't stand for this. My father's feelings are his own, I said, turning back to the sink, my hands busy with mundane tasks that felt more real than any of their manufactured drama. But Grandma Eleanor's wishes are legally binding, and I have the documentation to prove it. The legal wrangling began, as expected. My father, fueled by a potent cocktail of rage and humiliation, hired a top-tier estate lawyer, a man known for his ruthlessness. They challenged the will, citing undue influence, mental incompetence, all the usual suspects. They wanted to prove Grandma Eleanor hadn't been of sound mind, but they underestimated Grandma Eleanor. They underestimated her foresight. Mr. Abernathy, a man of quiet competence and unshakable integrity, was ready.
He presented the copies of the will, the supporting documents from Sterling National, the affidavit, and a series of professional evaluations of Grandma Eleanor's mental state conducted in the months leading up to her passing. These weren't casual observations. They were thorough, detailed assessments by reputable medical professionals, all confirming her lucidity and sharp intellect. The process was agonizingly slow, each legal maneuver a fresh stab of pain. My father's lawyer tried to turn me into the villain, the greedy granddaughter who manipulated a frail old woman. They painted me as an outsider, someone who had always been resentful of the real family. It was a desperate attempt, a smear campaign, but it lacked any substance. I had no motive beyond honoring my grandmother's final request. During this time, I made a conscious decision to distance myself from the daily drama. I moved out of the family home, renting a small, unassuming apartment across town. I needed space to breathe, to process, and to prepare for the inevitable fallout. I continued to visit the 19 beneficiaries, not as a conqueror, but as a conduit, ensuring they understood their inheritance, helping them navigate the initial shock, and offering a listening ear. Some were grateful, some were overwhelmed, but all, in their own way, acknowledged the profound impact of Grandma Eleanor's generosity. The turning point came at a mandatory mediation session. My father sat across the table, his face a mask of cold fury. His lawyer was all sharp suits and sharper words, meticulously dissecting every point of contention. Carol sat beside him, her eyes fixed on me, a silent, venomous accusation in their depths. Mr. Abernathy calmly presented the evidence. He laid out Grandma Eleanor's affidavit, her clear, unambiguous words detailing her motivations. He highlighted the financial stability of my father and his immediate family, contrasting it with the genuine need of many of the other beneficiaries. He spoke of Grandma Eleanor's desire to foster genuine connection and appreciation, rather than reward expectation. Then, in a move I hadn't anticipated, Mr. Abernathy produced another document. It was a letter, handwritten, addressed to my father, dated a year before Grandma Eleanor passed. It wasn't part of the official will, but it was undeniably hers, her familiar script filling the page. "Robert," it began, the words stark on the page. "I have watched you for years. I have seen your ambition, your success. I am proud of what you have built, but I have also seen how the pursuit of wealth has shaped you. It has made you distant, less patient, less loving. You call me only when you need something, or when you feel I owe you something. Your mother is not a bank, Robert. And your siblings, who have always been closer to you, who have shared your life, also deserve your attention. I have seen the way you dismiss Carol's concerns, the way you overlook Mark's restlessness, the way you seem to have forgotten Sarah entirely. This family, the one you are building, is becoming a kingdom of gold, but its foundations are crumbling. I wish for you to remember what truly matters. I wish for you to reconnect. My will is my final attempt to remind you." The silence in the room was absolute. My father, who had been leaning forward ready to argue, recoiled as if struck. His face drained of color. Carol, her mouth agape, looked from the letter to my father, a dawning horror in her eyes. Mark, who had been scowling, now looked uncomfortably down at his hands. Sarah's eyes welled up. The lawyer, for the first time, seemed unsure. He picked up the letter, his brow furrowed, and began to read it in a low voice. The weight of it hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't just a legal document. It was a mother's plea, a final, desperate attempt to reach her son, to mend what had been broken. My father's lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice subdued, "this letter, it adds a layer of complexity. It suggests a deeply personal motivation behind Mrs. Miller's decisions. While it doesn't invalidate the will, it certainly complicates the narrative of undue influence." My father finally looked at me. There was no rage now, only a hollow, profound sadness, a dawning comprehension of the chasm that had opened between him and his mother, a chasm he had widened with his own actions. She thought I was cold?" he whispered, the words barely audible. "She thought you were distracted, Dad," I said, my voice soft, devoid of triumph. "Distracted by the pursuit of wealth, distracted from what truly mattered. She wanted to give you all a reminder, a chance to remember that family, genuine connection, is the real inheritance." The mediation ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. My father's lawyer, faced with the irrefutable evidence and the emotional weight of the letter, advised his client to settle. The legal challenge was dropped. The beneficiaries received their shares, some with disbelief, others with tearful gratitude. The family home remained my father's, but the atmosphere within its walls was irrevocably changed. Carol and my father's relationship became strained, the unspoken accusations and resentments festering between them. Mark, chastened, began to re-evaluate his own priorities, channeling his energy into his own burgeoning tech startup, no longer solely dependent on the promise of an inheritance. Sarah, encouraged by her own small share and the newfound freedom it represented, began pursuing her lifelong dream of opening a small bookstore. As for me, I didn't stay in the gilded cage of our family mansion. I used my inheritance wisely, not to flaunt wealth, but to build a life of purpose. I invested in local businesses, supported community projects, and anonymously funded scholarships for underprivileged students. I made sure the names of the 19 beneficiaries, the people Grandma Eleanor had chosen, became synonymous with positive change in their communities. There were no grand pronouncements, no public displays of victory. My revenge, if you could call it that, was quiet, sustained, and deeply satisfying. It was in the quiet hum of my own contented life, in the knowledge that I had honored my grandmother's last wishes, and in the profound shift I had witnessed within my own family, even if it was born of pain and loss. My father and I have a fragile, tentative truce. We exchange polite emails, and I visit on holidays, always bringing a small, thoughtful gift, a gesture of respect, not of obligation. We don't talk about the past, not directly, but there's a new understanding in his eyes when he looks at me, a flicker of recognition for the woman I have become, a woman shaped not by entitlement, but by genuine connection and quiet strength. The money was just the catalyst. Grandma Eleanor, in her infinite wisdom, had given me the greatest gift of all, the truth and the courage to live by it. And that, I've learned, is worth more than any fortune. The echoes of her generosity continue to ripple outwards, a testament to a woman who understood that true wealth lies not in what we possess, but in what we share, and in the quiet, enduring power of kindness. It's a legacy I carry forward, one day at a time, a living testament to a grandmother who knew exactly what she was doing and a granddaughter who finally understood.